A man refused to tell anyone where he was born. When people asked about his childhood, he changed the subject. When a famous artist tried to paint his portrait, he nearly shut down his entire philosophical school in protest. This wasn't paranoia or eccentricity. This was Plotinus, and his refusal to acknowledge his own physical existence was completely intentional, rooted in a philosophy so radical it would reshape Western thought for the next 1,000 years. He died in 270 CE, alone on an estate in rural Italy, whispering final words about returning the divine within us to the divine in all things. By then, he'd spent decades teaching that everything we see, touch, and experience is essentially a shadow. That reality, as we know it, is just the faintest echo of something incomprehensibly greater. And unlike most philosophers who theorized about transcendent experiences, Plotinus claimed he'd actually achieved union with the ultimate source of existence multiple times. His student Porphyry, who knew him for years, documented 4 separate instances of complete mystical union during their time together. 4 moments where this frail, aging philosopher claimed to have merged consciousness with the absolute foundation of reality itself. That's not philosophy as intellectual exercise. That's philosophy as lived transformation. We know he was born around 204 CE, probably in Egypt. Though even that's contested. The location could have been Lyco in Upper Egypt, near modern Asyut, or possibly Deltic Lycopolis in the northern Delta region. Scholars have spent centuries trying to determine his ethnic background. Was he Egyptian? Greek? Roman? The evidence points in multiple directions, and the man himself offered exactly zero help with the question. Here's what we can say with reasonable certainty. Greek was his primary language. He received a Greek education. Beyond that, the details dissolve into speculation. Lloyd Gerson, one of the foremost Plotinus scholars, argues he was almost certainly Greek. A.H. Armstrong, another authority, puts it more carefully. All that can be said with reasonable certainty is that Greek was his normal language and that he had a Greek education. The ambiguity isn't accidental. Plotinus actively avoided discussing his origins. He showed no interest in his ancestry, his birthplace, or anyone else's for that matter. This wasn't modesty, it was philosophical consistency. If you genuinely believe that material existence is merely a degraded reflection of true reality, why would you care about something as material and contingent as where your body happened to emerge into the world? Porphyry reports that Plotinus once refused to have his portrait painted. The refusal was so adamant, it nearly caused a crisis. Think about that. A portrait seems harmless, a reasonable request from the devoted students who wanted to preserve their teacher's image. But to Plotinus, it represented everything wrong with how people engage with reality. A portrait captures the body, the material form, the least important aspect of who he was. To sit for a painting would be to validate the very illusion he spent his life trying to help people see through. His students, desperate to preserve some visual record, had to resort to deception. Aemilius, one of his closest followers, brought Carterius, the most skilled artist in Rome, to the regular philosophical gatherings. These sessions were open to anyone interested, so Carterius could attend without raising suspicion. Over weeks of observation, the artist memorized Plotinus's features, his expressions, the way he held himself during lectures. Back in his studio, working from memory, Carterius produced a portrait. Aemilius provided feedback, refining details, until they had what Porphyry describes as a remarkably lifelike image. All of this happened without Plotinus's knowledge. When he eventually discovered what they'd done, you can imagine his reaction wasn't enthusiastic. But by then the portrait existed, and his students had what they wanted. The anecdote reveals both his principled resistance to material representation and the lengths his followers would go to preserve any trace of him. Before philosophy consumed him, Plotinus received extensive education in mathematics and science. Porphyry notes he had complete knowledge of geometry, arithmetic, mechanics, optics and music, by the time he turned toward philosophical study. This wasn't superficial familiarity. These were deep competencies in technical fields that required years of dedicated work. The mathematical background matters. It would later inform his philosophical system in subtle but significant ways. The precision of geometric reasoning, the abstract beauty of numerical relationships, the way optics reveals the gap between appearance and reality, all of this shaped how he thought about metaphysics. But something was missing. At 28 years old, unusually late by ancient standards, Plotinus felt a sudden, overwhelming impulse to study philosophy. He travelled to Alexandria, the intellectual centre of the Roman world, expecting to find teachers who could satisfy this new hunger for understanding. Alexandria disappointed him completely. He attended lectures by the most eminent professors in the city. Each one left him more depressed than the last. The teaching was sophisticated, technically proficient, but somehow empty. None of these celebrated scholars offered what he was searching for, though he probably couldn't have articulated exactly what that was. This went on for weeks or months, Plotinus growing increasingly despondent, sitting through lecture after lecture that addressed the mind but never touched whatever deeper thing was demanding attention. Finally, an acquaintance noticed his frustration and made a suggestion. There was this self-taught philosopher named Ammonius. No formal credentials, no official position at the museum or library. Just a man who gathered students and taught Platonism in his own way. Plotinus attended one lecture. Afterward, he declared that Ammonius was the teacher he'd been seeking his entire life. That moment of recognition is striking. After years of education in mathematics and science, after weeks of disappointment with Alexandria's established professors, he walks into a room and immediately knows, this is it. What made Ammonius different? We'll never know for certain. The man wrote nothing. He made his students promise not to divulge his teachings. This oral tradition approach meant his ideas survived only through those he influenced, and even then transformed by their own interpretations. What we know is that Plotinus stayed with Ammonius for 11 years. Not 11 months, 11 years. From approximately 232 to 243 CE, he devoted himself entirely to studying under this mysterious self-taught philosopher. No degree program lasts that long. You don't spend over a decade with a single teacher unless something profound is happening. Ancient philosophical schools weren't like modern universities. You didn't enroll to take courses and obtain credentials. You joined a community dedicated to a particular way of life, a cooperative pursuit of truth that could last years or even decades. The goal wasn't academic achievement, it was transformation. Liberation of the spirit, a fundamental reordering of how you understood yourself and reality. During those 11 years, Plotinus absorbed Plato's dialogues, studied Ammonius's commentaries on them, and developed the foundations of what would become his own system. The relationship between teacher and student must have been intense. Ammonius saw something in this late-blooming student, and Plotinus found in Ammonius's interpretation of Plato something that finally made sense of his philosophical hunger. But Ammonius's influence created a problem for historians. Since he wrote nothing and forbade his students from recording his teachings, we can't separate what Plotinus learned from his master versus what he developed independently. The mature philosophy we find in the Enneads, the treatises Plotinus would eventually write, contains ideas that might have come from Ammonius or might be original innovations. The line is impossible to draw. What happened next was completely unexpected. After 11 years of intensive philosophical study, Plotinus decided he needed to investigate Persian and Indian philosophy. This wasn't casual curiosity. He was willing to risk his life for it. In 242 CE, the Roman Emperor Gordian III assembled an army to march against Persia. Military campaigns were dangerous, brutal affairs with high casualty rates. But Plotinus now 38 years old, saw an opportunity. If he joined the expedition, he could travel to Persia and potentially beyond, learning firsthand about Eastern philosophical traditions. He enlisted. A philosopher joining a military campaign is unusual enough. A philosopher joining specifically to study enemy intellectual traditions is almost unheard of. But Plotinus wanted to know whether the Persians and Indians had insights the Greeks lacked, whether there were truths about reality that could only be learned by engaging with radically different philosophical frameworks. The campaign was a disaster. The army made it as far as Mesopotamia before everything fell apart. Gordian III was murdered by his own soldiers. Philip the Arabian was proclaimed emperor. The expedition collapsed into chaos, and Plotinus found himself stranded in hostile territory, hundreds of miles from safety, with no army to protect him and no clear way home. He barely escaped with his life. The journey back to Antioch was difficult and dangerous, though we don't have details about exactly what he endured. What we know is that he survived, made it back to Roman territory, and by 244 CE had relocated to Rome. Did he learn anything from Persian or Indian sources during the aborted expedition? Scholars debate this endlessly. Some see Eastern influences in his later philosophy, particularly in his mysticism and his concept of the One. Others argue the similarities are coincidental, that Plotinus developed his ideas entirely within the Greek Platonic tradition. The honest answer is we don't know. If he did encounter Persian or Indian teachings, he never explicitly acknowledged the debt. His system is thoroughly grounded in Plato, Aristotle, and other Greek sources. But the impulse to seek wisdom in the East, the willingness to risk everything for it, tells us something about his intellectual openness and his conviction that truth might be found in unexpected places. Rome in 244 CE was the center of an empire that stretched from Britain to Mesopotamia, from North Africa to the Rhine. It was also beginning to show signs of the crisis that would dominate the 3rd century: political instability, economic pressure, military threats on multiple frontiers. Within this churning imperial capital, Plotinus established himself as a teacher. He was 40 years old. He'd spent 11 years studying with Ammonius, risked his life trying to reach the East, and now arrived in Rome with a fully developed philosophical vision, but no reputation, no institutional affiliation, no established position in the city's intellectual circles. Somehow he built a following. Students began attending his lectures. Word spread about this Egyptian or Greek philosopher who taught a particularly compelling interpretation of Plato. Within a few years, he'd established a regular gathering, what would eventually become one of the most influential philosophical schools in the ancient world. The sessions were informal, no formal enrollment, no fees, no rigid curriculum. Anyone interested could attend. The discussions ranged freely across metaphysics, ethics, cosmology, psychology, aesthetics. Plotinus encouraged unlimited questioning. If someone raised an objection or identified a difficulty, the conversation wouldn't end until the problem was resolved, even if that took hours or days. This openness created an atmosphere of genuine inquiry. Students weren't passive recipients of doctrine. They were active participants in working out philosophical truth together. The goal wasn't to memorize Plotinus's answers, but to develop the capacity to think philosophically, to see through conventional assumptions to the deeper structures of reality. Gradually, a core group emerged. Porphyry would arrive later and become the most famous, but early on there was Aemilius, the devoted follower who orchestrated the secret portrait. There was Castricius Firmus, a Roman senator. There was Eustochius, a physician from Alexandria who would eventually attend Plotinus in his final illness. These weren't just students, they became friends, collaborators, a community bound by shared commitment to philosophical transformation. And at the center was this increasingly frail figure who refused to discuss where he came from, who lived simply despite growing respect among Rome's elite, who seemed more interested in transcendent reality than in the physical world everyone else took for granted. For 20 years, Plotinus taught without writing anything down. 20 years of lectures, discussions, debates, all transmitted orally in the traditional manner of ancient philosophy. His ideas circulated among students, but existed nowhere in permanent form. That was about to change. Porphyry would arrive in Rome in 263 CE, joining the philosophical circle and immediately recognizing that something extraordinary was happening in these gatherings, something that needed to be preserved before it disappeared with the teacher's death. But we're getting ahead of ourselves. First, we need to understand what was actually happening in those years before Porphyry, in the philosophical laboratory Plotinus had created in the heart of Rome. The teaching method was radical for its time. Plotinus didn't lecture from prepared notes. He didn't impose a fixed curriculum. Instead, he created conditions for genuine philosophical discovery. Each session began with a question or a text from Plato, but where it went depended entirely on what emerged through dialogue. Someone would raise an objection. Why does Plato say the soul is immortal? How can we know this? Plotinus wouldn't simply assert an answer. He'd work through the difficulty, following the logic wherever it led, even if that meant spending an entire afternoon on a single passage. The goal wasn't coverage, the goal was understanding. This made for sessions that could be intellectually exhausting. Porphyry later described interrogating Plotinus for 3 straight days about how the soul relates to the body. 3 days on one question. And Plotinus never showed impatience, never suggested they move on to something else. If the difficulty hadn't been resolved, the discussion wasn't finished. What's striking is how this differed from other philosophical schools. The Stoics had their doctrines, the Epicureans had their teachings. You learned the system, memorized the arguments, applied the principles. Plotinus offered something messier and more demanding. He was teaching people how to think philosophically, not what to think. The physical setting matched the intellectual approach. No formal lecture hall, no tiered seating, no architectural declaration of hierarchy. Students gathered in Plotinus's home, which by the time Porphyry arrived was substantial but not ostentatious, comfortable enough for serious work, simple enough to avoid distraction. And distraction was everywhere in 3rd century Rome. The empire was convulsing through what historians call the crisis of the 3rd century. Between 235 and 284 CE, there were more than 50 claimants to the imperial throne, armies made and unmade emperors. The economy suffered from inflation and debasement of currency. Plague swept through multiple times. Barbarian invasions threatened the frontiers. You'd think this chaos would have made philosophical contemplation impossible or irrelevant. Instead, it seems to have intensified interest in Plotinus's teaching. When the material world is demonstrably unstable, when political power proves fragile, when death arrives without warning, the promise of something permanent beyond all this becomes compelling. But Plotinus wasn't offering escape from reality. He was offering a different understanding of what reality actually is. The visible world wasn't an illusion to be dismissed. It was a reflection, an image, a manifestation of something deeper. Understanding that relationship, seeing through appearances to the structure beneath, that's what philosophy could accomplish. His students came from remarkably diverse backgrounds. Ammonius was from Tuscany, devoted enough to the philosophical life that he stayed with Plotinus for 24 years. Castritius Firmus was a Roman senator, someone with real political power, who nonetheless found value in these abstract discussions. Eustochius was a physician from Alexandria who eventually abandoned his medical practice to study philosophy full-time. There were women in the circle as well, though the sources mention them less frequently. Roman aristocratic women, widows with wealth and independence, found in Plotinus's teaching something that addressed their intellectual needs. This wasn't common. Most philosophical schools were male-dominated spaces, but Plotinus seems to have welcomed anyone genuinely interested in the work. The social mixing was unusual for Rome, where class boundaries were rigid and carefully maintained. Yet in these philosophical gatherings, a senator and a freed slave could engage as equals. What mattered wasn't your status outside the room. What mattered was your ability to follow an argument, to raise genuine difficulties, to contribute to the collective pursuit of understanding. This egalitarian spirit had limits, of course. Everyone present was literate, educated, able to engage with complex Greek texts. These weren't popular lectures for the masses. Philosophy in the ancient world was always an elite activity. But within that educated minority, Plotinus created unusual openness. His reputation grew steadily, not through self-promotion, but through results. Students who studied with him developed reputations as serious thinkers. Arguments originating in his school began circulating in Rome's intellectual networks, and Plotinus himself became known as someone worth consulting on difficult questions. He acted as an arbiter in disputes, trusted by both parties to render fair judgment. When wealthy Romans approached death, they frequently named Plotinus guardian of their children. This wasn't ceremonial. It meant taking legal responsibility for minors, managing their property, overseeing their education. Porphyry reports that Plotinus's house was full of orphaned children, and he fulfilled these obligations scrupulously. Think about what that means. This philosopher, whose teaching emphasized transcendence, whose own interest in material reality was minimal, spent significant time managing practical affairs for children who'd lost their parents. Reviewing accounts, making decisions about property, ensuring they received proper education. The contradiction is instructive. Plotinus distinguished between the philosopher's inner life and outer responsibilities. Contemplation of eternal truths didn't excuse you from ordinary duties. In fact, the ability to maintain inner focus while handling practical matters was precisely what philosophical training should enable. He demonstrated this constantly, able to discuss metaphysics while simultaneously attending to household management. One anecdote captures this perfectly. A student arrived with some trivial worry about a lost item. Instead of dismissing the concern as beneath philosophical attention, Plotinus helped resolve it. Then, without missing a beat, he returned to the previous discussion about the nature of the soul, picking up exactly where they'd left off. The shift between registers was seamless. This integration of contemplation and action reflected his philosophical commitments. The material world wasn't evil or contemptible. It was simply less real, less fundamental than the intelligible realm. You didn't need to flee from it. You needed to understand its proper place in the larger structure of reality. But for 20 years, all this teaching remained oral. No written treatises, no systematic exposition, nothing that could be studied independently of the teacher's presence. This was traditional. Ancient philosophy valued direct transmission from teacher to student. Writing was suspect, potentially misleading, unable to capture the living development of thought through dialogue. Plato himself had expressed skepticism about written philosophy in the Phaedrus. A text couldn't answer questions or clarify misunderstandings. It said the same thing to everyone, regardless of their preparation. Plotinus seems to have shared this preference for oral teaching, at least initially. The turning point came in 253 CE, when Emperor Gallienus took power. Gallienus and his wife Salanina took interest in philosophy generally, and Plotinus specifically. This imperial patronage gave Plotinus access to resources and influence he hadn't possessed before. More importantly, it gave him an audience receptive to ambitious proposals. And Plotinos had one. He approached the emperor with a plan to restore a ruined city in Campania, a region south of Rome. The city would be called Platonopolis. Its citizens would live according to the laws of Plato's Republic and laws. Plotinus himself would relocate there with his students, establishing a philosophical community governed by reason rather than force. The proposal is startling when you think about it. Plotinus's own writings show almost zero interest in political philosophy. He never discusses ideal constitutions or practical governance. His focus is relentlessly metaphysical, concerned with eternal realities far removed from political arrangements. Yet here he was proposing to establish a real city based on Platonic principles. What was he thinking? Maybe he saw an opportunity to demonstrate that philosophy could shape actual communities, not just individual souls. Maybe imperial patronage made the impossible seem possible for a moment. Maybe he genuinely believed that a small group of philosophically trained individuals could create a different kind of society. We'll never know because it didn't happen. The emperor denied the request. Porphyry, our source for this story, admits he doesn't know why. Opposition from imperial advisors, practical concerns about resources, simple unwillingness to grant such unusual patronage. The reason remains mysterious, but the attempt reveals something about Plotinus's vision. Despite his otherworldly focus, despite his emphasis on transcendence, he thought philosophy had practical application. The contemplative life and the active life weren't incompatible. They were different expressions of the same underlying commitment to living according to truth. The failure of Platonopolis meant that commitment would be expressed differently. No philosophical city-state. Instead, the informal school in Rome continued, growing in influence but remaining structurally unchanged. Students came, stayed for years, then left to teach elsewhere, or returned to their ordinary lives carrying what they'd learned. And still nothing was written down. Everything existed in memory, in notes students might have kept privately, in the shared culture of ongoing conversation. The philosophical work was happening, developing, becoming more sophisticated through constant testing and dialogue. But it wasn't being preserved for posterity. That was about to change. In 263 CE, a 30-year-old student from Tyre arrived in Rome. His name was Porphyry, though he'd been born Malchus and taken a Greek name. He was already an accomplished scholar, trained in rhetoric and philosophy, author of several works. He'd come to Rome specifically to study with Plotinus. Porphyry would stay for 6 years, and during those years, he would become convinced that what was happening in these philosophical sessions needed to be captured in writing. Not for the students present who were experiencing it directly, but for future generations who would never have the chance to study with Plotinus personally. He began urging his teacher to write the conversations that had shaped so many students, the arguments that had been refined through years of dialectical testing, the insights that emerged from sustained contemplation. All of this should exist in permanent form. Plotinus resisted at first. Writing seemed almost beside the point when the real work was the transformation of souls through direct philosophical engagement. But eventually he agreed, or perhaps he'd already begun writing independently, and Porphyry simply encouraged him to continue and organize the work more systematically. The chronology is unclear. What's certain is that by the time Porphyry arrived, some treatises existed, and over the next years, Plotinus would produce the body of writing that would become the Enneads. The writing process was characteristic. Plotinus would compose entire treatises mentally before touching pen to paper. When he finally wrote, the words flowed continuously, as if he were copying from an internal text already complete. He could hold a conversation while writing and never lose his train of thought. The focus was absolute, but the physical act of writing was difficult. His eyesight was failing. His handwriting was nearly illegible. Words run together, spelling inconsistent. He never revised, couldn't bear to reread what he'd written. Once the thought was on paper, he moved to the next, never looking back. This meant the manuscripts were rough, requiring significant editorial work, to be comprehensible to others. Porphyry became that editor. He collected the treatises as they were completed, organized them, corrected obvious errors, prepared them for wider circulation. This was delicate work. How much could you clarify without distorting the author's meaning? When spelling was clearly wrong, you fixed it. But what about ambiguous passages? What about arguments that seemed incomplete? The collaboration between Plotinus and Porphyry during these years created something unprecedented. A philosophical system of enormous sophistication was being captured in writing by someone who understood it from inside, who'd participated in the discussions that generated it, who could ask the author for clarification when necessary. Between 263 and 268, Plotinus composed 24 treatises, not short essays, dense, demanding philosophical investigations, each exploring a different dimension of reality. The range is remarkable. The nature of the soul, the problem of evil, the relationship between intellect and being, beauty, providence, time and eternity. Each treatise assumes the others, refers back to previous arguments, builds toward a comprehensive vision. What vision? That's what we need to understand next. Everything begins with the one, not one thing among others, not a first cause in the sequence of causes. Something stranger. The one is what exists before existence itself makes sense as a category, before being and non-being split apart, before thought could distinguish itself from what it thinks about. Plotinus is trying to describe something that, by definition, can't be described. Language requires differentiation. Subject, predicate, object. This divided that, but the one has no parts, no divisions, no internal structure whatsoever. So when Plotinus writes about the one, he's constantly undermining his own words. He'll say something, then immediately qualify it. Not quite that. Not exactly. The words point, but they can't capture. Think of it this way. Every statement you make assumes multiplicity. The sky is blue requires at least two things. Sky and blueness, held in relation, but the one isn't in relation to anything. It's not even related to itself, because that would require an internal distinction between that which relates and that which is related to. The one is absolutely simple. And simplicity here doesn't mean easy to understand. It means without composition, without parts, without any internal complexity whatsoever. Why call it the one? Because it's the principle of unity itself. Everything that exists participates in unity to some degree. A human being is one thing. A tree is one thing. Even a pile of sand has enough unity to be called a pile rather than just individual grains scattered randomly. Where does that unity come from? Not from the things themselves. They're composite, made of parts, constantly changing. The unity must come from something that is itself pure unity. That's the one. But here's where it gets difficult. The one can't be a thing. Things have properties, characteristics, definitions. The moment you define something, you've introduced multiplicity. A definition distinguishes what something is from what it isn't. It places the thing in a category, relates it to other things. The one has no properties, no characteristics, no definition. It's not good in the way we understand goodness. It's not powerful in the way we understand power. Every positive statement about it is simultaneously false. Plotinus knows this creates a problem. If you can't say anything true about the one, why talk about it at all? Why build an entire philosophical system around something you admit you can't describe? His answer is that the one is known through a different kind of knowing, not discursive reasoning, which proceeds step by step, building arguments, not conceptual thought, which grasps objects through definitions, something more immediate, more direct. He calls it union, mystical union. The soul, through intense contemplation and spiritual discipline, can actually become one with the one. Not understand it, not think about it, become it. And Plotinus isn't speaking theoretically here. He experienced this union himself. Multiple times. Porphyry records that it happened at least 4 times during the 6 years he studied with Plotinus, and Plotinus mentions it happening before Porphyry arrived. What was it like? Plotinus struggles to say. The experience can't be translated into the language of ordinary consciousness because it involves the temporary dissolution of the subject-object distinction that makes ordinary consciousness possible. Imagine trying to describe vision to someone who's been blind from birth. You can use analogies, metaphors, but the actual experience remains beyond words. That's how Plotinus talks about union with the One. But we're getting ahead of ourselves. Before the soul can unite with the One, we need to understand how the soul relates to it in the first place. And that requires understanding the structure of reality itself, because the One, despite its absolute simplicity, is productive. Not intentionally, not through will or desire, simply by being what it is. Plotinus uses the metaphor of light. The sun doesn't decide to shine. Shining is what the sun does by nature. Light radiates from it necessarily, not as a deliberate act but as an inevitable overflow of its being. The One is like that. Its perfection is so complete that it naturally, necessarily overflows. And that overflow is the first thing that's not the One, the first level of multiplicity. This is called emanation. Reality flows out from the One in a hierarchical sequence. Each level derives from the one above it and produces the one below it. The first thing to emanate from the One is nous, usually translated as intellect or intelligence, though those English words don't quite capture it. Nous is where being first appears, where existence in the way we understand it begins. It's the realm of eternal forms, the perfect archetypes of everything that can exist in the lower realms. Here's where Plotinus takes Plato's theory of forms and gives it a new foundation. Plato had argued that particular things in the physical world are imperfect copies of perfect forms. A beautiful painting participates in the form of beauty. A just action participates in the form of justice. But where do these forms exist? Plato was vague on this point. Sometimes he seemed to place them in a separate realm. Sometimes he suggested they were thoughts in the divine mind. Plotinus says they're in nous, and nous itself is a unified multiplicity. It contains all the forms, but they're not separate from each other the way things in the physical world are separate. They interpenetrate. Each form contains all the others while remaining distinct. This is hard to visualize because our experience is of separation. This chair isn't that table. This moment isn't that moment. But in nous, the forms exist in perfect unity and diversity. Nous is also self-thinking thought. It thinks itself. Subject and object are identical. The thinker and the thought are the same reality viewed from different angles. This makes nous the first level, where knowledge, in the proper sense, becomes possible. The One doesn't know anything because knowledge requires the distinction between knower and known. But nous knows itself perfectly because it is both. And knowing itself, nous knows all the forms. Because the forms aren't external objects that nous observes. They are nous viewed as the totality of what is intelligible. But nous, for all its perfection, isn't the ultimate. It's still multiple. It contains the forms, which means it has internal differentiation. It's one thing, but it's one thing made of many things. So nous depends on the One for its unity. It turns back toward the One, contemplating it, and in that contemplation maintains its own existence. This turning back is crucial to understanding Plotinus's system. Everything that emanates from the One has a natural desire to return to it, to reunite with the source, but the return isn't a collapse back into undifferentiated oneness. Each level maintains its own existence while orienting itself toward what's above. Below nous is soul. Actually, soul's plural, though they're all ultimately one soul viewed from different perspectives. Soul is where the eternal meets the temporal, where the unchanging forms begin to express themselves in change, in process, in time. The world's soul organizes and animates the physical cosmos. Individual souls animate individual bodies, but all souls are connected, all participate in the one soul, which itself participates in nous, which participates in the one. Soul is responsible for the existence of the physical world, not through creation in the sense of making something from nothing. Plotinus has no concept of creation ex nihilo. Rather, soul's contemplation of nous produces the physical realm as a kind of image or reflection. Matter itself, the lowest level of reality, is almost nothing. It has no positive characteristics of its own. It's pure receptivity, pure potentiality, the capacity to receive form, but possessing no form itself. This makes matter, paradoxically, the furthest thing from the one, while also depending completely on the one for its existence. It's the last, weakest echo of the original overflow. The entire structure is vertical. The one at the top, then nous, then soul, then the physical world, then matter at the bottom. Each level less unified, less perfect, less real than the one above it. But here's what makes this more than just abstract metaphysics. You are soul. Your true self exists in that intermediate realm between the eternal forms and the temporal body. Right now, you're identified with your body, with your particular location in space and time, with your individual thoughts and feelings. But that's not what you really are. Your real self contemplates the forms, participates in nous, is always already connected to the one, though you've forgotten this truth through your descent into matter. The entire point of philosophy for Plotinus is remembering who you really are, turning your attention away from the body, away from sense perception, away from the constant flux of the material world, and directing it upward toward its source. This isn't escapism, it's recognizing reality as it actually is. The physical world isn't evil, it's not a prison the soul fell into through some cosmic accident. It's a natural overflow of the one's perfection. But it's not where you belong. Not ultimately. You're here temporarily, and your task is to prepare for the return. How? Through philosophy as spiritual practice, through contemplation, through purification of the soul from its attachment to bodily pleasures and material concerns. The soul has to climb back up the levels it descended, first detaching from the body and the physical world, then ascending from soul to nous, from discursive reasoning to intuitive intellection. Finally, from nous to the one, from thought to union. Each stage requires different practices, different ways of directing attention, different modes of knowing, and at the highest level you don't know the one. You become it, or rather, you realize you never stopped being it. The separation was always illusory, a result of the soul's descent into multiplicity and its forgetfulness of its origin. This is the vision Plotinus spent 20 years elaborating in Rome, not as abstract theory, but as a map for the soul's return to its source. Each treatise addresses a different aspect of this journey, a different philosophical problem that needs to be solved before the ascent can continue. The problem of evil. If everything flows from the one, which is perfect, where does evil come from? The problem of providence. How can the one care for the world without compromising its transcendence? The problem of time. How can the eternal produce the temporal without itself entering into time? Each question had been debated for centuries in the Platonic tradition. Plotinus wasn't inventing from scratch. He was synthesizing, refining, systematizing insights that existed in fragmentary form in Plato, in Aristotle, in the Stoics. But the synthesis was new. The systematic rigor was new. The clarity about the hierarchical structure of reality, the relationship between the levels, the process of emanation and return, all of this was Plotinus's achievement. And it was being captured in writing at exactly the right moment. Because within a few decades of his death, the Roman Empire would undergo the most significant transformation in its history. Christianity was rising, not just as one cult among many, but as the dominant religious and intellectual force in the Mediterranean world, and Christian thinkers, looking for philosophical resources to articulate their theology, would find Plotinus' system irresistibly useful. The one could be mapped onto God. Nous could be understood as the divine logos, the Word. Soul could be related to the Holy Spirit. The entire structure could be Christianized with relatively minor modifications, but that's getting ahead of the story. In the late 260s, as Plotinus continued writing his treatises and Porphyry continued organizing them, none of this future influence was visible. What was visible was the deteriorating political situation. Emperor Gallienus, who'd been Plotinus's patron and friend, was assassinated in 268. The new emperor, Claudius II, had no interest in philosophy. Plotinus was getting old, his health was failing. That intestinal illness, possibly leprosy, was becoming impossible to ignore. And Porphyry was about to leave Rome, driven by depression and thoughts of suicide that Plotinus had to talk him out of, recommending a change of scenery as therapy. The golden period was ending. What came next would be darker, more isolated, but in some ways even more profound. Porphyry left Rome in 268, heading to Sicily on Plotinus's advice. The philosopher had noticed his student spiraling into depression, contemplating suicide. "Change your surroundings," Plotinus told him. "The darkness will follow you if you let it, but sometimes distance helps." It worked. Porphyry recovered in Sicily, continued his philosophical work, and stayed in touch through letters. But the separation meant something profound. The golden age of the Roman school was over. Plotinus was now in his mid-60s. His health, which had never been robust, was collapsing. That intestinal illness, the one he'd been ignoring for years, was becoming impossible to dismiss. Modern scholars debate what it was. Leprosy is the traditional diagnosis, based on Porphyry's description of the symptoms. Others suggest tuberculosis or some form of chronic infection. What's certain is that it was painful, progressive, and disfiguring. His hands became so damaged he could barely hold a pen. His eyesight, already poor, deteriorated further. The handwriting that had always been nearly illegible became completely impossible for anyone else to read. He'd never cared about spelling or neatness, but now the physical act of writing itself was becoming an ordeal. Friends and students began to avoid him, not from lack of affection, but from fear. If it was leprosy, it was contagious. Even if it wasn't, the visible deterioration was disturbing. People stopped coming to the lectures. The house that had been full of discussion and debate grew quiet. Plotinus withdrew, not emotionally, but physically. He stopped teaching, stopped seeing most visitors. But he didn't stop writing. This is when some of his most difficult and profound treatises were composed. Essays on the nature of the One, on how the soul achieves union with the divine, on the relationship between eternity and time. Dense, compressed, urgent, as if he knew time was running out and there was still so much to articulate. He refused most medical treatment, not from stubbornness, but from principle. He rejected medicines made from animal substances. He was vegetarian, had been for years, and the idea of consuming parts of animals, even for healing, violated his philosophical commitments. Life was sacred, all life. Taking from other living beings, even to preserve your own existence, required justification that Plotinus couldn't provide. He also refused enemas, which Roman doctors prescribed for intestinal complaints. "Too undignified for an old man," he said. Porphyry records this with what sounds like frustration. Here was his teacher, brilliant and spiritually advanced, dying from an illness that might have been manageable with proper treatment, refusing help out of philosophical consistency. But was it consistency or something else? Plotinus had spent decades teaching that the body was a prison, that material existence was a degraded state, that the goal of philosophy was to escape physicality and return to the One. Now, facing the dissolution of his own body, he was living those teachings. He wasn't clinging to physical life. He was letting it go, perhaps even welcoming its end as the final liberation. Emperor Gallienus, who had been Plotinus's patron and friend, was assassinated in 268, the same year Porphyry left. The new emperor, Claudius II, had no interest in philosophy or philosophers. The brief moment when Neoplatonism had imperial support vanished. That dream of Platonopolis, the philosopher's city in Campania, was definitively dead. No emperor would fund it now. No one would resurrect that vision. Plotinus left Rome, or more accurately, he was moved. His friends, seeing him deteriorate, arranged for him to stay at an estate in Campania, a place called Puteoli, modern Pozzuoli, near Naples. The property belonged to a friend named Zethos, who had died and left it to someone willing to care for Plotinus in his final days. So the philosopher, who had spent 26 years in Rome, teaching and writing, building a school and a reputation, ended his life in rural isolation. One friend stayed with him, Eustochius, the doctor. Not there to treat him, Plotinus wouldn't allow that, but to be present, to witness what happened in those final months. We know Plotinus kept writing. Treatises were being composed even as his body failed. The mind remained sharp. The vision remained clear. The ability to articulate complex metaphysical arguments didn't diminish with physical strength. But there's something else Porphyry mentions, almost in passing. Plotinus experienced mystical union with the One several times during these final months. He'd experienced it before, 4 times during the years Porphyry knew him. But now, as death approached, the experiences became more frequent, as if the barrier between the material and the divine was thinning. As the body weakened, the soul grew stronger, more capable of the ascent it had been practicing for decades. This is the paradox at the heart of Plotinus's life. He distrusted the body, saw it as an obstacle to truth, yet he lived in it and through it for 66 years. He taught that the material world was inferior, a mere shadow of reality, yet he engaged deeply with that world, teaching, writing, settling disputes, managing guardianships for orphaned children. He wasn't a hermit in a cave. He was a public intellectual in Rome, one of the most material cities in history. The tension between transcendence and engagement runs through everything he wrote. The soul wants to return to the One, but it also has responsibilities here, in this degraded realm. It can't simply abandon the world. It has to transform it from within, gradually elevating matter towards spirit through philosophy and virtue. His illness forced a final confrontation with that tension. The body was breaking down, revealing its fragility and impermanence. Everything Plotinus had taught about the unreality of the material seemed confirmed. Yet the pain was real. The deterioration was real. The fear his students felt was real. Matter might be inferior to spirit, but it wasn't nothing. It had weight. It had consequences. How do you reconcile a philosophy of transcendence with the concrete reality of a failing body? Plotinus's answer was to keep writing, to keep thinking, to keep ascending mentally even as he descended physically. The treatises from this period don't mention his illness. They don't reference his personal situation. They're abstract, theoretical, focused on eternal truths rather than temporal circumstances. This could be seen as avoidance, a refusal to face mortality honestly, but it's more likely something else, a demonstration that philosophy isn't just theory, it's practice, it's a way of living and a way of dying. You prove your philosophical commitments not by talking about them in comfort, but by maintaining them when everything's falling apart. Plotinus maintained them, right to the end. Eustochius was there for the final moments. The account he gave Porphyry has become famous, though it's impossible to verify. Plotinus spoke his last words, a sentence that perfectly encapsulated everything he taught. Strive to give back the divine in yourselves to the divine in the all. Then something strange happened. A snake emerged from under the bed where Plotinus lay. It slithered across the floor, found a hole in the wall, and disappeared. At that exact moment, Plotinus died. Eustochius swore this was what happened. Porphyry recorded it. Later readers have debated what it means. Some see it as symbolic, the snake representing the soul leaving the body, returning to its source. Others think it's literal. Maybe there was a snake. Maybe the timing was coincidental. Maybe Eustochius, grieving and philosophical, interpreted a random event as meaningful. What matters is the image it creates. The philosopher dies as the snake departs. The material body releases the divine principle it had been containing. Everything Plotinus taught about the soul's imprisonment in matter and its eventual liberation finds expression in this one detail. The year was 270 CE, the second year of Emperor Claudius II's reign. Plotinus was 66 years old. He'd spent the first 28 years of his life in Egypt, learning mathematics and mechanics before philosophy grabbed him. 11 years studying with Ammonius in Alexandria. One disastrous year trying to reach Persian and Indian philosophers, nearly dying in Mesopotamia when Emperor Gordian's expedition collapsed. Then 26 years in Rome, teaching and writing and building the philosophical system that would define Neoplatonism. He left behind 54 treatises, not published in any organized form, just scattered essays addressing different philosophical problems. Some were short, a few pages, others were long, complex examinations of difficult questions. All were written in that dense, compressed Greek that made them hard to read, even for educated native speakers. Porphyry, still in Sicily, when Plotinus died, received the news from Eustochius. His teacher was gone. The school in Rome was finished, the manuscripts were scattered, and Porphyry realized something crucial. If someone didn't collect and organize these writings, they'd be lost. Individual treatises might survive, but the system, the comprehensive vision Plotinus had developed, would fragment and disappear. So Porphyry set himself a task. He would edit the treatises, organize them into a coherent structure, provide introductions and explanations, create a complete edition of Plotinus's work that would preserve not just the individual arguments, but the overall philosophical vision. This wasn't simple. The treatises had no obvious order. They'd been written over decades, addressing whatever question was being discussed in the school at the time. Some were revisions of earlier works, some contradicted each other, or seemed to, because Plotinus had refined his thinking over time. Porphyry spent years on this project. He read everything multiple times. He consulted with other students who'd known Plotinus. He tried to identify which treatises went together, which arguments built on which foundations, which questions had to be answered before others could be approached. Eventually, he created what we now call the Enneads. The name means nines in Greek. Porphyry organized the 54 treatises into 6 groups of 9, creating a symmetrical structure that had nothing to do with chronology and everything to do with pedagogy. The first Ennead, he decided, should deal with ethics, how to live well, questions about virtue, happiness, beauty, things that connect to everyday human experience. Start where the student is with practical concerns about how to conduct yourself in the world. The second and third Enneads address cosmology, the physical universe, how matter came to exist, what time is, why there's motion and change. These are more abstract but still connected to visible reality. You're learning to think about the world philosophically, seeing past surfaces to underlying principles. The fourth Ennead focuses on the soul, what it is, how it relates to the body, how it descended into material existence. This is where you start turning inward, examining your own nature rather than external phenomena. The fifth Ennead deals with nous, the divine intellect, pure thought, the realm of Platonic forms. This requires a different kind of thinking, intuitive rather than discursive. You're learning to apprehend truth directly, without the mediation of reason. The sixth Ennead culminates in the One, the source of everything, the principle beyond being, the goal of the entire philosophical journey. This structure is brilliant. It takes you from where you are, embedded in matter and concerned with practical questions, and gradually elevates you toward transcendence. Each stage builds on the previous one. Each Ennead prepares you for the next. But it's also artificial. Plotinus didn't write this way. He wrote in response to specific questions, addressing problems as they arose. The order Porphyry imposed creates clarity at the cost of authenticity. We're reading Plotinus filtered through his students' organizational genius. Porphyry knew this. He admits it openly in the introduction he wrote, "The Life of Plotinus that prefaces the Enneads." He explains his editorial choices. He describes how he sometimes split long treatises into multiple parts to make the numbers work. He acknowledges that the chronological order of composition differs from his thematic arrangement. What he created wasn't Plotinus raw and unedited. It was Plotinus made systematic. Plotinus transformed into a textbook. And that's what survived. That's what later centuries received. Not the informal school sessions, the 3-day debates about how soul relates to body, the spontaneous lectures that followed wherever the discussion led. We got the organized version. The Enneads as a structured course in Neoplatonic philosophy. This shaped everything that followed. When Christian theologians read Plotinus in the 4th century, they read Porphyry's edition. When Islamic philosophers encountered Neoplatonism centuries later, they were reading through this same organizational framework. The structure Porphyry imposed became inseparable from the philosophy itself. You can't undo that. Can't get back to the original Plotinus, the one who spoke extemporaneously and wrote in bursts of inspiration without revision. That version is gone, preserved only in fragments within Porphyry's systematic reconstruction. But maybe that's appropriate. Plotinus taught that the material world is a reflection of higher realities, imperfect, distorted, but still containing truth if you know how to read it. The Enneads are a reflection of Plotinus's teaching, organized, edited, shaped by someone else's understanding, but still containing the vision, still capable of doing what Plotinus wanted philosophy to do, elevating the soul toward the One. That's what philosophy did for Plotinus. It wasn't intellectual exercise, it was spiritual technology, a method for transforming consciousness itself. So what is that transformation? What actually happens when you follow the path laid out in the Enneads? The answer requires understanding Plotinus's 3 hypostases, 3 levels of reality arranged hierarchically from highest to lowest. The One at the top, then nous, divine intellect, then soul, and finally at the bottom, the material world we inhabit. These aren't just abstract categories, they're stages of emanation, reality flowing downward from absolute unity to multiplicity and division. Like light radiating from a source, growing dimmer the farther it travels. But they're also stages of return, the path back up, from matter to soul to intellect to the One, from multiplicity to unity, from separation to union. The entire system is designed around this double movement, descent and ascent, emanation and return. You exist at the lowest level, trapped in body and matter. Philosophy teaches you to climb back up, start with the One. Plotinus calls it the first principle, the source, the good. It's beyond being, beyond thought, beyond any category or description. This sounds mystical. It is mystical, but there's logic here too. If you try to think about the ultimate source of everything, you run into a problem. Any description you give involves multiplicity. Saying the One is good implies a distinction between the One and goodness. Saying it exists implies a difference between the One and existence. But the ultimate principle can't contain any multiplicity. Can't have parts or attributes or distinctions. Otherwise, it wouldn't be ultimate. Something simpler would have to exist before it. So the one is absolutely simple. No divisions, no complexity. Pure unity transcending every category, including existence itself. Plotinus insists we can't properly speak about the one, can't define it, can't even name it. Calling it the one is just a placeholder, a gesture towards something ineffable. This creates an immediate paradox. How do you teach philosophy about something you can't describe? How do you write treatises about what exceeds language? Plotinus's answer is apophatic theology, negative description. You say what the one isn't, not multiple, not composite, not in time or space, not having attributes or qualities. Strip away everything. What remains isn't a thing at all. It's the condition for things, the possibility of existence itself. And here's where it gets strange. The one doesn't create intentionally, doesn't decide to make a universe, doesn't plan or will or act. Creation happens through overflow. The one is so perfect, so complete, that reality emanates from it like light from the sun or water from a spring. This isn't a choice, it's necessity. Perfection must radiate. Fullness must flow outward. The one generates reality simply by being what it is. The first thing that emanates is nous, divine intellect, the realm of Platonic forms. This is the first level of multiplicity. In nous, unity begins to differentiate. The one was absolute simplicity, nous content distinction, thinker and thought, subject and object, the forms as objects of contemplation, and the intellect that contemplates them. But it's still unified in a way matter isn't. The forms don't exist separately in space and time. They interpenetrate. Each form contains all the others implicitly. The form of beauty contains justice, contains goodness, contains all of them. Nous is eternal, unchanging, perfect. It's the blueprint for everything that exists below it. Every particular thing in the material world is a degraded copy of its form in nous. Think of it like this. You see a beautiful sunset. That beauty isn't in the sunset itself. Matter can't be beautiful. Matter is just stuff arranged certain ways. The beauty you perceive is your soul recognizing the form of beauty present dimly in the material arrangement. The sunset participates in beauty, imperfectly, temporarily, but the form itself exists eternally in nous, perfect and unchanging. From nous emanates soul. This is harder to grasp because soul operates at multiple levels simultaneously. There's the world's soul, a single cosmic principle that animates the entire universe. It's the bridge between the eternal realm of nous and the temporal realm of matter. Then there are individual souls, yours, mine, every human being's. These are parts of the world's soul, but also somehow distinct from it. This is where Plotinus gets complicated. How can souls be both individual and part of a larger whole? How can they be separate and unified simultaneously? His answer involves the nature of soul itself. Soul isn't material. It doesn't occupy space, so it doesn't divide the way matter divides. When you cut an apple, you get separate pieces. When soul manifests in individual beings, it remains one while becoming many. It's like a voice in an amphitheatre. The sound reaches thousands of people simultaneously. Each person hears it individually. But the voice itself hasn't split into pieces. It's one sound perceived by many listeners. Individual souls descended from nous into matter. This descent is both necessary and tragic. Necessary because reality must manifest at all levels. Tragic because souls forgot their divine origin. You're a soul that descended into a body. You became identified with that body, started thinking you are the body, forgot that your true nature is divine intellect, ultimately rooted in the one. This is the human condition. Amnesia, souls trapped in matter, having forgotten what they really are. Philosophy is the cure, it's remembering. Anamnesis, to use Plato's term, recollecting what you always knew but forgot. The Enneads guide this recollection systematically. You start where you are, in a body, concerned with material things. Gradually, you learn to identify with soul rather than body. You practice ethics, not because rules matter in themselves, but because ethical action trains you to value the immaterial over the material. Justice and temperance aren't physical. They're soul recognizing its own nature. You study the cosmos. Learn to see matter as soul's expression rather than soul's prison. The physical universe isn't evil. It's the world soul's creative activity. Beautiful in its way if you see it properly. You turn inward, examine your own soul, discover that thinking isn't bodily. Your capacity for mathematics proves this. Numbers aren't physical objects, neither is the mind that grasps them. This realization is crucial. You are not your body. Your essence is immaterial. You're a soul using a body, not a body that happens to think. From there you ascend to nous. This requires a different kind of knowing. Discursive reasoning won't work. Reason operates sequentially, moving from premise to conclusion. Nous knows everything simultaneously. You have to learn intuitive knowing, direct apprehension, seeing truth whole instead of assembling it from parts. Plotinus says you already possess this capacity. You participate in nous, whether you know it or not. Every time you understand a mathematical truth, or recognize beauty, or grasp justice, you're touching the forms. But you do it unconsciously. The goal is to do it deliberately, to stabilize your awareness at the level of nous, to think with divine intellect instead of embodied reason. This sounds impossible. It probably is impossible to sustain permanently while incarnate, but Plotinus claims you can achieve it temporarily. Moments of pure intellectual vision where you see reality as nous sees it, and beyond nous lies the one, the final ascent, the ultimate goal. This can't be achieved through thought. The one transcends intellection. Now knows the forms through contemplation. The one is beyond contemplation, beyond subject and object, beyond the distinction between knower and known. You can't think your way there. You can only become there. Union with the one requires abandoning everything, including your own selfhood. Plotinus describes it as ecstasy, literally standing outside yourself. You stop being you. The boundaries dissolve. What remains is simple presence, pure awareness, without an aware subject. He claims to have experienced this, not once as a singular event, multiple times. Porphyry counted at least 4 occasions during their years together. This wasn't philosophy anymore. This was mysticism, direct experience of ultimate reality. And this is what makes Plotinus unique. He's a rigorous logical thinker. His arguments are precise, his reasoning tight. But he's also describing states of consciousness that transcend logic. The Enneads are a roadmap to experiences most people never have, instructions for achieving union with the source of all being. Whether you believe that's possible is almost beside the point. What matters is that Plotinus built an entire philosophical system around it, explained how reality must be structured if such union is possible, developed practices for achieving it. He wasn't speculating, he was reporting, describing a territory he'd visited and providing directions for others who wanted to follow. This is why the Enneads feel different from other philosophical texts. They're not just arguing positions, they're initiating you into a way of life that culminates in transcendence. The progression through the 6 Enneads mirrors the soul's ascent. You start with practical ethics, move to cosmology, study the soul's nature, ascend to nous, finally approach the one. Each stage prepares you for the next. Each requires mastering what came before. You can't skip steps, can't jump straight to union with the one while still identified with your body. Porphyry understood this. His editorial structure wasn't arbitrary, it was pedagogical, a curriculum designed to transform students gradually. But here's what's remarkable. For all this talk of transcendence and union with the One, Plotinus remained deeply engaged with the world. He arbitrated disputes, raised orphans, advised senators, participated fully in Roman civic life. This wasn't hypocrisy, it was integration. The philosopher who has ascended to Nous doesn't abandon the material world. He engages it more effectively because he's not identified with it. You can act in the world without being of the world, can fulfill obligations without being attached to outcomes, can love people without possessing them. This is the practical application of Plotinus's metaphysics. Understanding reality's hierarchical structure frees you to operate at all levels simultaneously. You're a soul descended into matter. Fine, act in matter. But remember what you are. Maintain connection to Nous. Orient yourself toward the One. Live as both human and divine. Participate in multiplicity while remaining rooted in unity. This dual consciousness is the goal. Not escape from the world, enlightened engagement with it. And this is where later readers got Plotinus wrong. They emphasized the otherworldly aspects, the escape from matter, the rejection of the body. Made him sound like a dualist who hated physical reality and wanted to abandon it. But that's not quite right. Plotinus thinks matter is the lowest level of reality, the farthest from the One, the least real, but it's still part of the emanation, still contains traces of divine presence. The material world isn't evil, it's weak, diffuse, lacking the concentrated reality of higher levels. Your task isn't to destroy matter or escape it, it's to see through it, recognize it as soul self-expression, appreciate it without being trapped by it. This nuanced position gets lost when people summarize Plotinus as anti-material. He's not against matter. He's for soul, for intellect, for the One. Matter is fine for what it is. Just don't mistake it for ultimate reality. So the Enneads teach you to live in multiple dimensions simultaneously. Physical body moving through space, soul contemplating forms, intellect participating in Nous, and at the peak, moments of union with the One. Most people live only at the first level, identified completely with body and matter, unaware that they're souls, blind to the forms, never approaching Nous or the One. Philosophy wakes you up, shows you what you really are, teaches you to operate from higher levels, and once you've seen reality whole, you can't unsee it. Can't go back to pure materialism. Can't believe you're just a body anymore. This is irreversible transformation, not intellectual knowledge, existential recognition. You are divine intellect descended into matter. Your origin is the One. Your nature is soul. Your capacity is nous. Remember that. Live from that. Return to that. That's the message of the Enneads. Everything else is commentary. The part explains the One, nous, soul, and the process of emanation and return, the heart of Plotinus's system, while connecting it back to the practical purpose of the Enneads as a transformative text rather than just abstract philosophy. But here's what nobody tells you about philosophical systems. They don't exist in isolation. They interact with the world, get interpreted, misinterpreted, adapted, corrupted, revived. And Plotinus's thought had one of the strangest afterlives in intellectual history. Christianity absorbed him while pretending it didn't. Islamic philosophy embraced him openly. Medieval mystics channeled him without attribution. Renaissance thinkers rediscovered him and went wild. Modern philosophers referenced him, then dismissed him, then quietly borrowed his insights anyway. The influence is massive but hidden, like underground water shaping the landscape above it. Let's trace how that happened. First wave hits immediately after his death. Porphyry edits the Enneads, spreads the teachings. Other students do the same. Within a generation, Neoplatonism becomes the dominant philosophical school in the late Roman Empire. Not just among pagans, Christians start engaging with it seriously. And this creates a problem, because Plotinus's system looks suspiciously compatible with Christian theology. Three hypostases sounds like the Trinity. The One as source of all being, God the Father, nous containing all forms, the divine Logos, Christ, soul animating matter, the Holy Spirit. The parallels seem obvious, too obvious to ignore. Early Christian theologians noticed this immediately. Some rejected Plotinus as pagan nonsense. Others saw an opportunity. Maybe Greek philosophy had been preparing the way for Christian revelation. Maybe Plotinus had glimpsed divine truth through reason alone. The most influential Christian Neoplatonist was a guy you've probably never heard of, but who shaped everything that came after. Pseudo-Dionysius the Areopagite, writing around 500 CE, claiming to be the Dionysius converted by Paul in Acts. Actually, a Syrian monk synthesizing Plotinus with Christian theology. His works, the divine names, the mystical theology, the celestial hierarchy, are pure Plotinian metaphysics dressed in Christian language. The One becomes God, emanation becomes creation, the return to unity becomes mystical union with Christ. And because everyone thought he was Paul's direct convert, these texts carried enormous authority throughout the Middle Ages. Plotinus influenced Christian thought for 1,000 years under a false identity. Augustine did something similar earlier. Read the Platonists, experienced his famous garden conversion, then spent the rest of his career Christianizing Neoplatonic concepts. The ascent of the soul toward God in the Confessions, that's Plotinus. The nature of evil as privation rather than positive force, Plotinus. Time as the moving image of eternity, also Plotinus. Augustine rarely credits him directly, just absorbs the framework and baptizes it. This pattern repeats constantly. Christian mystics throughout the Middle Ages describe experiences identical to Plotinus's union with the One. They frame it as encountering Christ or the Trinity, but the phenomenology matches precisely what Plotinus described. Same stages of ascent, same dissolution of subject-object distinction, same ineffability afterward. Meister Eckhart in the 14th century talks about the soul's ground being identical with God's ground. That's straight Plotinian doctrine. The authorities accused him of heresy partly because his mysticism was too Neoplatonic, too focused on union rather than relationship. Meanwhile, Islamic philosophy takes a different path. No need to hide the influence there. Al-Kindi, Al-Farabi, Avicenna, they all study Plotinus openly. Parts of the Enneads get translated into Arabic under the title Theology of Aristotle. Massive confusion ensues because everyone thinks they're reading Aristotle when they're actually reading Plotinus. But the ideas spread anyway. Islamic mysticism, Sufism, develops a metaphysics remarkably similar to Plotinus. The concept of fana, annihilation of the self in union with the divine, that's the soul's return to the One. The stages of the spiritual path, parallel to Plotinian emanation and return. Al-Ghazali, the great Islamic theologian, attacks the philosophers for their Neoplatonism. Too much emphasis on intellect, not enough on revelation. But even his critique shows how thoroughly Plotinian concepts had penetrated Islamic thought. Then the Renaissance happens, and everything explodes. 1462. Cosimo de' Medici acquires Greek manuscripts, including Plotinus, assigns Marsilio Ficino to translate them. Ficino spends decades on this project, produces the first complete Latin translation of the Enneads in 1492. Suddenly scholars across Europe have access to the original texts, not just second-hand summaries or misattributions. The impact is immediate and profound. Renaissance Neoplatonism becomes a thing. Ficino, Pico della Mirandola, Giordano Bruno, they all build philosophical systems explicitly based on Plotinus. Mix it with Hermeticism, Kabbalah, Christian theology, create this wild synthesis that looks nothing like medieval Aristotelianism. The Platonic Academy in Florence becomes the centre of this movement. They celebrate Plato's birthday annually. Study the Enneads alongside Plato's dialogues. Try to reconcile ancient wisdom with Christian doctrine. It's ambitious and messy and incredibly generative. This is when art starts depicting Platonian concepts visually. The great chain of being becomes a popular theme, paintings showing hierarchical ascent from matter to God. Botticelli's Primavera might be illustrating Ficino's Neoplatonic cosmology. Michelangelo's Sistine Chapel ceiling definitely engages with these ideas about divine creativity and the soul's relationship to the one. But then the Counter-Reformation happens. The church gets nervous about all this mysticism and ancient philosophy. Giordano Bruno gets burned at the stake partly for his Neoplatonic pantheism. The movement goes underground somewhat. It doesn't disappear though, just transforms, shows up in unexpected places. The Cambridge Platonists in 17th century England revive Plotinus. Ralph Cudworth, Henry Moore, they're reading the Enneads and using them to counter both Catholic scholasticism and the rising mechanical philosophy of Descartes. They want a middle path, reason and revelation together, spiritual reality compatible with new science. This doesn't win the day philosophically, but it influences later thinkers. You can trace lines from the Cambridge Platonists to Berkeley's idealism to certain strands of Romanticism. Speaking of which, the Romantics loved Plotinus. Coleridge read him, Shelley referenced him. Blake's mystical visions align closely with Platinian metaphysics, even if Blake probably never read the Enneads directly. The idea that material reality is a diminished reflection of spiritual truth, that imagination grants access to higher reality, that the individual soul can reunite with the cosmic whole. Pure Neoplatonism filtered through poetry. Then something interesting happens in the 19th century. German idealism engages with Plotinus seriously. Hegel knows the Enneads well. His dialectical progression from immediate being to absolute spirit bears suspicious resemblance to Plotinian emanation and return. The structure's different, but the underlying logic is similar. Reality as the self-development of spirit toward self-knowledge. Schelling even more explicitly draws on Plotinus, his philosophy of nature as the unconscious life of spirit. That's soul operating in matter. His concept of intellectual intuition as higher than discursive reason, straight from the Enneads. These guys don't always credit Plotinus directly, but the influence is obvious once you know what to look for. 20th century gets weird with it. Plotinus becomes academically respectable again. Major scholarly additions appear. Émile Breillet in France, Armstrong in Britain, serious philosophical engagement rather than just historical interest, but also some strange appropriations. Henri Bergson's Élan vital, his critique of mechanistic materialism, his emphasis on intuition over analysis, all this has Plotinian echoes. He probably wasn't directly influenced, but the resonances are there. Heidegger dismisses Neoplatonism as onto theology, the mistake of thinking being is a supreme being, but his own concept of being as that which withdraws, which can't be grasped by calculative thinking, which requires a kind of receptive openness, sounds awfully like Plotinus's one. Different vocabulary, similar structure. Process philosophy, particularly Whitehead, engages with Neoplatonic themes. The idea that reality is fundamentally dynamic rather than static. That creativity is the ultimate principle, that actual entities are moments of experience rather than dead matter. None of this is explicitly Plotinian, but the family resemblance is undeniable. And then there's the mysticism thread. Evelyn Underhill's classic study Mysticism analyzes Western mystical experiences and finds Plotinian patterns everywhere. The stages of ascent she describes could be lifted straight from the Enneads. She's identifying a perennial structure that Plotinus articulated philosophically, and mystics have experienced across traditions. Aldous Huxley's The Perennial Philosophy does something similar, argues that mystical traditions worldwide describe the same reality using different languages. The metaphysical framework he uses to make this argument, heavily Neoplatonic. The one, the levels of being, the soul's journey, all there. This brings us to a crucial question. Was Plotinus right? Not historically influential, we've established that. Actually correct. Does reality have this structure? Three hypostases emanating from an ineffable one? Soul really separate from body? Forms really exist in divine intellect? Return to unity actually possible? Modern philosophy mostly says no. The whole framework seems antiquated. We don't think in terms of emanation anymore. Don't accept the sharp matter-spirit dualism. Don't believe in transcendent forms. Neuroscience explains consciousness materialistically. Evolutionary biology explains life without invoking soul. Physics describes reality without needing the one. From this perspective, Plotinus is interesting historically, but wrong philosophically. A brilliant dead end, important for understanding how people used to think. Not a live option for how we should think now. But is that fair? Some contemporary philosophers argue Plotinus still has something to offer. Not the whole system necessarily, but insights that haven't been superseded. The hard problem of consciousness, for instance. How subjective experience arises from objective physical processes. We still can't explain that. Plotinus's account of soul as fundamentally different from matter, as requiring its own principles. Maybe that's not obviously wrong. Or the question of mathematical truth. Platonism about mathematics is still defended. The view that mathematical objects exist independently of physical instantiation or human thought. That's basically Plotinus's doctrine of forms applied to numbers and equations, or the critique of materialism, the argument that treating matter as fundamental leaves out something essential about reality. That consciousness, meaning, value, these can't be reduced to particles in motion. Plotinus made that case 1,800 years ago. It's still being made today, in different vocabulary. The mystical experiences Plotinus describes, people still report them. Across cultures, across time periods, the phenomenology remains consistent. Unity, consciousness. Dissolution of ego. Sense of absolute reality beyond the everyday world. Either all these people are deluded in remarkably similar ways, or they're accessing something real. Plotinus tried to make sense of that experience philosophically. Build a rational framework for what can't be captured rationally. That's a legitimate philosophical project, even if you don't buy his specific metaphysics. And there's something else, something harder to articulate, but maybe more important. Plotinus represents a different way of doing philosophy entirely. Not just different conclusions, different method, different goal. Modern philosophy is mostly about solving problems, clarifying concepts, analyzing arguments, building theories that explain specific domains, ethics, epistemology, philosophy of mind, specialized technical work within established frameworks. Plotinus wasn't doing that. He was trying to understand reality whole, from the highest principle down to the lowest manifestation, integrating metaphysics, ethics, aesthetics, epistemology into a unified vision. Not solving problems, but transforming consciousness. Reading the Enneads isn't meant to give you better arguments for your next paper. It's meant to wake you up, make you recognize what you are, change how you live. Philosophy as spiritual practice, not academic discipline. We've lost that, professionalized philosophy into something narrow and technical. Maybe we needed to, maybe that's progress, but something was sacrificed. A sense that philosophy could be existentially transformative, that it could address the deepest human questions about meaning and purpose and our place in the cosmos. Plotinus kept that alive, showed what philosophy looks like when it aims at wisdom rather than just knowledge, at transformation rather than just information. That's his real legacy, not the specific doctrines, the example of philosophy as a way of life, as serious intellectual work in service of something beyond intellect. Whether his system is true or not almost misses the point. He was trying to articulate something that can't be fully articulated, point toward what exceeds language, use reason to reach beyond reason. That project doesn't age. Every generation needs to attempt it again in its own terms. The part traces Plotinus's influence through history while questioning both his correctness and the nature of philosophical work itself, preparing for the final part's assessment of his enduring significance. The question nobody asks is whether Plotinus actually lived what he taught. We have Porphyry's biography. We know the external facts. Born around 204 CE, probably in Egypt, studied under Ammonius Saccas for 11 years, joined Emperor Gordian's ill-fated Persian campaign at age 38, barely escaped with his life, settled in Rome at 40, and taught there until his death in 270. But what was he actually like as a person? How did someone who preached detachment from the body handle the messiness of human existence? Porphyry gives us glimpses. Plotinus refused to have his portrait painted. When his friend Aemilius secretly commissioned one anyway, having an artist attend lectures and memorize his features, Plotinus never knew. The distrust of material reality extended to his own image. He wouldn't even sit for a painting, yet this same man had a house full of orphaned children. When aristocratic Romans died, they appointed Plotinus guardian of their kids. His house was packed with young people whose property and education he managed with meticulous care. Porphyry says he never made an enemy despite constant arbitration of disputes. Here's someone who thought the material world was essentially unreal, but he still showed up for the practical details of other people's lives. The teaching sessions were remarkable. Porphyry once questioned Plotinus for 3 straight days about how soul relates to body. Plotinus kept explaining, working through every objection, never losing patience. When another student complained that he wanted to hear a proper lecture instead of all this back and forth, Plotinus shut him down. If we cannot first solve the difficulties Porphyry raises, what could go into the treatise? Philosophy wasn't performance. It was investigation, collaborative, exhausting, necessary. His writing process was equally strange. Porphyry says Plotinus composed everything mentally first. When he finally wrote, the thoughts flowed continuously, as if copying from a book. Someone could interrupt him mid-sentence, he'd have a conversation, then return to writing exactly where he left off without rereading anything. The handwriting was terrible. His eyesight was failing. He misspelled words, ran them together, didn't care. The only thing that mattered was the idea getting onto paper. He couldn't stand revising. Once something was written, it was done. Porphyry had to decipher these nearly illegible manuscripts and organize them into the Enneads. We owe the survival of Plotinus's thought to someone else's editorial patience. But the mystical experiences were the core of everything. Porphyry reports that Plotinus achieved complete union with the One 4 times during the years they knew each other. In earlier treatises, Plotinus mentions experiencing it often. What does that mean? We have descriptions: dissolution of subject-object duality, absolute unity, direct contact with ultimate reality. The kind of thing mystics across traditions report but can never quite capture in language. Plotinus tried anyway. The Enneads are an attempt to build rational scaffolding around something that exceeds rationality. To use concepts to point beyond concepts, to explain the unexplainable. That's either profound or impossible depending on your perspective. The practical side kept showing through despite the otherworldly focus. He proposed Platonopolis, a real city in Campania, restored and funded by Emperor Gallienus, where citizens would live according to Plato's laws. Plotinus promised to move there himself with his students. This never happened. Imperial support was withdrawn for unknown reasons. But the fact that he proposed it at all is fascinating. The philosopher who taught withdrawal from public life wanted to create a political community based on philosophical principles. Maybe it's not contradictory. Maybe living according to wisdom requires external structures that support internal transformation. Or maybe even Plotinus couldn't fully escape the tension between theory and practice. His final years were brutal. Some kind of painful illness, possibly leprosy. He stopped teaching. His students feared contagion and stayed away. He continued writing despite failing health, alone except for his doctor, Eustochius. He died in 270 at an estate in Campania, away from Rome. Eustochius was there. The final words, "Strive to give back the divine in yourselves to the divine in the all." Perfect summary of everything he taught. The soul returning to its source, the individual consciousness recognizing its identity with ultimate reality. The whole philosophical project compressed into one sentence. Then a detail that sounds mythological, but Eustochius swears was real. A snake crawled from under the bed and disappeared through a hole in the wall at the exact moment Plotinus died. Interpret that however you want. Symbol of the soul's departure. Random occurrence. Porphyry included it in the biography either way. So what do we actually have? A man who lived 66 years, wrote prolifically in the last 16, created a systematic philosophy that influenced centuries of thought, maintained high ethical standards while teaching transcendence of the material world, experienced mystical states he tried to articulate philosophically, and apparently never doubted that what he was doing mattered. That's worth examining. Not whether his metaphysics is correct, whether the life itself demonstrates something about what philosophy can be, because Plotinus represents a different relationship to ideas than we're used to now. Philosophy wasn't his profession, it was his life, not compartmentalized, not something he thought about during work hours then set aside. The distinction between living and philosophizing didn't exist for him. Theory and practice were inseparable. Understanding and transformation went together. You can't read the Enneads without encountering this. The text isn't offering you information to accept or reject. It's trying to change how you see, wake you up to what you already are, but don't recognize. Modern philosophy doesn't work like that. We analyze arguments, clarify concepts, build theories, solve problems within specialized domains: ethics, epistemology, philosophy of mind. Technical work requiring expertise. Nothing wrong with that. Progress happens through focused investigation, but something's missing. The existential dimension. The sense that philosophy addresses your life, not just your intellect, that it could transform you, not just inform you. Plotinus kept that alive. His influence on Christianity, Islam, the Renaissance, even modern thought preserves traces of it. The idea that philosophy is about wisdom, not just knowledge. That it aims at the good life, not just correct beliefs. Whether his specific system is true feels less important than the fact that he attempted it. Built a comprehensive vision of reality from first principles, integrated everything into a coherent whole, lived according to what he taught. That's rare. Most philosophers contradict their own principles regularly, teach ethics while behaving badly, preach rationality while making emotional decisions, advocate positions they don't actually embody. Not Plotinus. By all accounts, he walked the walk, practiced what he preached. The philosophy and the life aligned. That consistency matters more than correctness, because it demonstrates something about human possibility, that you can actually orient your entire existence around a vision of reality. That intellectual conviction can transform behavior. That philosophy can be lived, not just thought. The mystical experiences add another layer. They suggest Plotinus wasn't just theorizing. He was reporting, trying to articulate what he'd encountered directly. You don't have to believe mystical experience reveals objective truth, but you should acknowledge that people across cultures and centuries report remarkably similar phenomena: unity consciousness, dissolution of ego, sense of absolute reality beyond the everyday. Either they're all deluded in strikingly consistent ways, or they're accessing something real that our normal conceptual frameworks can't capture. Plotinus took the second option, built his entire philosophy around it, made mystical union the goal and the validation of the system. That's not how most philosophy works. We start with observations, build arguments, test conclusions. Mystical experience is suspect, too subjective, too unreliable, too easily explained by neuroscience or psychology. But what if it's not? What if there's a dimension of reality that can only be known through direct experience, that reason can point toward but never fully grasp? Plotinus would say that's exactly the situation. The one exceeds all categories, can't be known discursively, only approached through a kind of knowing that transcends subject and object. Modern philosophy mostly rejects this. We're empiricists or rationalists. We trust observation or logic, not mystical intuition. Maybe we're right. Maybe Plotinus was chasing something that doesn't exist, building elaborate structures on a foundation of subjective experience that proves nothing. Or maybe we've lost access to a genuine way of knowing. Narrowed epistemology to what can be measured or argued, missed something real because it doesn't fit our methods. That's the question Plotinus forces, not just about his specific claims, about what counts as knowledge, what philosophy should aim for, how we should live. And nobody can answer that definitively. You either find the mystical dimension compelling or you don't. Either the call to return to the one resonates, or it sounds like poetic metaphysics with no cash value. What remains regardless is the example. A life devoted entirely to philosophical understanding, a system built to make sense of the highest human experiences, a teacher who transformed students through sustained engagement with fundamental questions. That's not nothing. That's a vision of what philosophy can be when it refuses to settle for less than complete understanding, when it insists on integrating everything, when it demands that truth be lived, not just known. We don't do philosophy like that anymore. Can't really. The knowledge explosion makes comprehensive systems impossible. Specialization is necessary. Technical precision matters. But we lost something in the professionalization, the sense that philosophy could address the whole person, speak to the deepest questions about meaning and purpose, transform consciousness, not just clarify arguments. Plotinus kept that tradition alive, showed what it looks like to take philosophy seriously as a way of life, as spiritual practice grounded in rigorous thought. His final words capture it: strive to give back the divine in yourselves to the divine in the all. That's not advice for your next academic paper. That's a call to recognize what you are and live accordingly. Whether you can actually do that depends on whether his metaphysics is true, whether there really is a one, whether souls really emanate from it and return to it, whether mystical union is possible. Those are empirical questions in some sense, but they're not answerable through normal empirical methods. You can't run experiments on the one, can't measure emanation, can't prove mystical experience reveals truth. You can only try it yourself. Follow the path Plotinus described, see if it leads where he said it would. That's his real challenge, not to his arguments, to your life, whether you're willing to orient existence around the possibility that he was right, that there's something beyond the material world, that you're more than you think you are. That transformation is possible. Most people won't. The cost is too high. The modern world pulls in different directions, and maybe Plotinus was wrong anyway. But the invitation stands. 1700 years later, Strive to give back the divine in yourselves to the divine in the all. That's what philosophy looks like when it refuses to compromise, when it aims at the highest truth and accepts nothing less, when it demands complete transformation, not just intellectual understanding. You don't have to accept it, but you should recognize what you're rejecting, not just a metaphysical system, a vision of human possibility, a path to something beyond the ordinary, a life fully aligned with ultimate reality. Plotinus lived that, taught it, wrote it down despite failing eyesight and terrible handwriting, died alone with those final words. The philosophy survived, the Enneads exist, the invitation remains open. What you do with it is your decision. The man who refused to say where he was born ended up everywhere. That's the paradox Plotinus leaves us with. A philosopher so committed to transcending material reality that he wouldn't acknowledge his own body created a system that shaped how millions of people understood bodies, souls, and everything in between for 17 centuries. Think about what actually happened. A sickly Egyptian, or Greek or Roman, we still don't know, studied philosophy late, joined a doomed military campaign, barely survived, settled in Rome, and spent the last 16 years of his life writing dense Greek treatises that maybe 100 people read in his lifetime. That should have been the end of it. Obscure philosopher dies, students scatter, ideas fade. Instead, his thought infiltrated Christianity, while Christians pretended they'd come up with it themselves. Shaped Islamic philosophy openly, inspired Renaissance art and mysticism, influenced German idealism without acknowledgement, shows up in process philosophy, in studies of mysticism, in contemporary philosophy of mathematics and consciousness. You can trace lines from Plotinus to almost anywhere if you look carefully enough. Not because he was right about everything, because he asked questions that won't go away. What is the relationship between unity and multiplicity? How does consciousness relate to matter? Can reason point beyond itself? Is there something absolute underlying the flux of experience? These aren't solved problems. They're permanent features of human thought. Plotinus provided one set of answers, 3 hypostases emanating from an ineffable one. Soul descended into matter but capable of return. Reality as hierarchical overflow from perfect unity to diffuse materiality. Mystical union as both goal and validation of the entire system. That specific framework isn't widely accepted anymore. Neuroscience explains consciousness differently. Physics describes reality without needing the one. Evolutionary biology accounts for life without invoking soul. The edifice Plotinus built looks antiquated from our perspective, but the questions remain, and occasionally his answers still work better than the alternatives. The hard problem of consciousness. Why there's something it's like to be you. How subjective experience arises from objective processes. We still can't explain that. Plotinus's insistence that consciousness requires its own principles can't be reduced to matter. Maybe that's not obviously wrong. Mathematical Platonism. The view that numbers and equations exist independently of physical instantiation or human minds. That's just Plotinus's forms applied to mathematics, still defended by serious philosophers. Mystical experience. People keep reporting it. Unity consciousness. Ego dissolution. Direct contact with something absolute. Either it's all delusion or there's a dimension of reality our normal frameworks can't capture. Plotinus took the second option, built philosophy around it. You don't have to agree, but you should notice that the dismissal comes easy when you haven't tried what he's describing, when you've never attempted the practices, never pushed contemplation to where it allegedly breaks through into direct knowing. Maybe if you did, you'd confirm it's all subjective projection, or maybe you'd discover he was reporting accurately about a territory most people never visit. That uncertainty is central to his legacy. He's not offering arguments you can evaluate from your armchair. He's describing a path, claiming it leads somewhere specific, inviting you to test it yourself. Modern philosophy doesn't work that way. We analyze arguments. We don't expect philosophy to transform consciousness. Don't treat it as spiritual practice. Don't think the philosopher's life validates or invalidates their claims. Plotinus represents the alternative. Philosophy as way of life, theory inseparable from practice, understanding identical with transformation. He lived it, maintained ethical standards while teaching transcendence, managed practical affairs while contemplating the One, experienced mystical union while arbitrating property disputes, kept orphans fed while writing about eternal realities. The integration was seamless, no split between the contemplative and active life, no contradiction between metaphysics and ethics, everything unified under one vision. That's rare enough to be worth preserving, even if the specific vision is wrong. The example of comprehensive philosophy, thought that addresses everything, system building that refuses to leave anything out. We've mostly abandoned that, specialized into subfields, made progress through narrow focus, lost the capacity to speak about reality whole. Maybe that's necessary. Maybe the knowledge explosion makes comprehensive systems impossible, but something was sacrificed, the sense that philosophy could answer the biggest questions, could tell you what reality is and how to live in it. Plotinus kept that alive. His influence, however hidden or transformed, maintains the memory of philosophy's larger ambitions. The Enneads exist, difficult, dense, demanding, but accessible if you're willing to work, not as historical curiosity, as living text that might actually wake you up if you let it. Whether, it will depend on questions we can't answer from outside. Whether there really is something beyond matter. Whether consciousness really is irreducible. Whether union with the absolute is actually possible. Plotinus said yes to all of it, staked everything on those claims, lived accordingly, died with those final words about returning the divine to the divine. 17 centuries later, we're still figuring out whether he was right, still arguing about consciousness and reality and transcendence, still trying to understand what it means to be human in a universe we barely comprehend. His answers might not be correct, but the questions are permanent, and the attempt to answer them completely, to build a system that explains everything from the highest principle to the lowest manifestation, that's worth remembering. Not as doctrine to accept, as example to consider what philosophy looks like when it refuses to settle, when it demands total understanding, when it treats transformation as seriously as information. You can dismiss that as impossible. Probably most people will. The modern world makes different demands, and maybe comprehensive systems are just artifacts of a pre-scientific age when people didn't know how much they didn't know. Or maybe we've lost something, traded depth for breadth, precision for vision, technical competence for wisdom. Plotinus represents the path we didn't take. Philosophy as spiritual discipline, reason in service of transcendence. Thought aimed at the one. That path remains available. The Enneads are still there. The practices can still be attempted. The vision can still be tested. Most won't bother. Too strange, too demanding, too disconnected from contemporary concerns. But for those who do, who take it seriously enough to actually try, Plotinus promises something specific. Not arguments for your next paper. Not credentials or career advancement. Union with the absolute source of reality itself. Either that's the greatest truth philosophy can offer, or it's the most elaborate self-deception ever constructed. Plotinus bet everything on the first option, lived it, taught it, died believing it. The question he leaves isn't whether his system is true. It's whether you're willing to find out.